Hello everybody. Oh, today it's a grey old day. It's cold, it's been raining, and I feel like making something warming and nutritious. Now, my friend Yvonne sent me this amazing book for my birthday. It was so thoughtful of her because she knows so well my love of historical recipes and food history. This is called Dinner with Mr Darcy, and it's recipes inspired by the novels and letters of Jane Austen, who was a 19th century author in the first part of the 19th century, when women were less welcomed in the literary world, unless it was, say, something like a cookbook. This herb pie seems just the right thing to cook because it makes use of things like borage or sage with other soft leaves such as lettuce, mustard and cress, chard, beetroot leaves, spinach. Now, in our garden we still have plenty of lettuces, and I've already picked some. I also had a look to see what other tender leaves I had in the house and gathered quite a few. The original recipe was by Mrs Rundell, who was a cookery writer in the Georgian period. Her book was called A New System of Domestic Cookery, and it was published in 1806. Her recipe was more in terms of notes rather than the ingredients listed at the top and then the recipe underneath. Here at the top is in more modern format and is about half the quantity than the notes at the bottom, which were designed to feed more people. The ingredients at the top are based on enough for 4 people. Well, there's only Dan and I, so I'm going to halve these ingredients, and I'm going to be using a smaller container. It tells us that Mrs Rundell and her contemporaries did not distinguish between what we call leaves and herbs in those days. The beauty of this herb pie is that you could use any combination of leaves and add any leafy herbs. Soft leaves are ideal. You can also use things like rocket. So even herbs that the Georgians wouldn't have recognised, you can use in this pie, such as coriander, for example, although there would have been parsley. So let's get down to it. I have here a bunch of leaves. Some of these are going to be blanched in boiling water and then straight away immersed in cold water and chopped. Others we will be leaving as they are, and I'll probably just shred those a little bit. These are some beetroot leaves. These leaves I picked from our garden. We grow heritage beetroot. We've still got some growing. These were some of the better ones. I didn't want to strip the beetroots of their leaves, so I just was very selective and took some of the nicer ones. There's slight little holes where creatures may have had a nibble, but we do organic gardening. We don't use chemicals or any pesticides. This is slightly tougher. I'm it's a type of lettuce, I will probably immerse that. And then I have some cavolo nero. This we had left over from our Riverford organic vegetable box last week. I usually keep them wrapped in newspaper. We've had quite a lot of this. This is what's left. They will get blanched because the stalks are quite tough. And then these will be left as they are. We've got some more lettuce from our garden, some lovely crisp lettuce. And I've also got a bit of lovage, which I will just shred once the other vegetables are cooked. I might also add a few lettuce leaves from some romaine lettuce I bought this morning in Aldi. It's pretty much a good selection now. This is leftover baby spinach from a salad bag, and because it's baby spinach that doesn't need blanching, that's fine as it is. While the pan of water is coming to the boil, I'm going to make the pastry. These are 170 grams of plain flour there. I'm adding a little pinch of salt. And I have a scant 115 grams of unsalted butter. The pan of water is boiling, so I'm going to chuck the greens in. These are now ready to come out. I've got the water here. They're just slightly softening. That's exactly what you want. There we go. I'm going to reserve the water. I'm having pasta for lunch, so that water will do nicely. The next thing to do is to chop the butter as finely as possible into the bowl. I'm presuming this is how the pastry was made in the Georgian period. The quantities are very exacting. This pie isn't a northern pie. A northern pie usually has a crust at the bottom as well as the top. This is more like a pie from down south. And the illustration looks like the lid is puff pastry or flaky pastry rather than short crust. But the recipe asks you to make short crust, but there's no pastry as far as I can see on the base. The recipe for the pastry tells me to chop the butter with a knife until each piece of butter is as small as I can make it, making sure the pieces are thoroughly coated in flour. When I can chop no more, I'm to rub it in using my fingertips, which keeps the mixture from coming too warm, and that might make it dense. Okay, so we'll do that. Here we go. If you find it too hard work using this method, you could grate your butter into the flour, but make sure that your butter is chilled first. Or you could use maybe some vegetable suet or vegetable shortening, also grated in. The vegetable suet, of course, is small enough to blend into the flour quite easily, and then just rub in. That's about ready now. So the next thing to do is to add 2 tablespoons of cold water. I'm using ice cold water here, and I can't find my tablespoon measure. I think it's in the wash. So I'm using a teaspoon measure. 3 teaspoons is 1 tablespoon. So I need 6 of these. The next thing to do is mix it with a knife until it gets nice and clumpy. You may need to add a little more water. To be honest, I often make my pastry this way, although sometimes, especially if it's gluten-free flour, I will use an egg instead. A whole egg beaten does a good job, though sometimes I need to add a teaspoon or 2 of cold water as well. It's getting clumpy, but it does indeed need a little water. You find that not all flours react the same. They're all a little different. I've added another tablespoon, and that should be enough to bring it together. You could, if you wanted to, prepare this in a food processor. It would certainly make an easier job of it. But remember, this is a 19th century recipe from the Georgian era, and they didn't have electricals back in the day. The thing with baking is it's often best to get in there with your hands. There we go. Now, you don't want to knead this. It just needs covering with plastic wrap, or if you don't want to use plastic wrap, cover it in a piece of greaseproof paper. And then I'm popping it in the refrigerator for about half an hour. I've squeezed as much water out of the greens as possible. And now I'm going to give them a chop. They don't need to be too finely chopped. You want to maintain some of the texture. In particular, I'm going to chop the stalks, and then the leafy parts I won't cut quite as finely. And then it says, mix with the more delicate leaves, season with salt and pepper, and put aside in a buttered pie dish. These are the other leaves. I'm just going to break up the lovage a little bit. It's a very expensive ingredient in the Michelin star restaurants. We got this from the garden centre. There's a very small plant. It wasn't doing very well early in the summer, but now it's thriving since the weather became a bit cooler. I think it prefers a slightly cooler temperature. Break up this lovely homegrown lettuce. Just shred these spinach leaves a little. Don't forget to shred the stalks. Big pieces of stalk aren't very nice in a pie. If you've got vegetables that are kind of slightly past the best, not on the turn, but past the best, not the type that you'd want to put in a fresh salad, for example, this pie is ideal for using those. So salt, pepper, and I'm going to add a little bit of broadleaf thyme as well. next thing the recipe asks for is a kind of buttery sauce. This is unusual to me, although I'm sure it'll be delicious. I'm making half a quantity, so I'm using about 100 millilitres of milk, 1/2 cup or 125 millilitres of light or single cream, and 1 tablespoon of flour. I'm going to be using corn flour. I just think it's easier to get it nice and smooth. I have here a large free-range egg. In it goes. Then I'm going to pour in the 100 millilitres of milk. To be perfectly honest, this recipe doesn't even say how many it's going to feed, and looking at the size of the pie dish I've had to use for the quantity of leaves, this would probably feed 8 people. Now, goodness knows how many people the original recipe fed, because there's twice the amount as in the recipe at the top. It would have fed a lot of people anyway. I was initially assuming it would feed 4 there at the top, but it's probably nearer 6 to 8 people. Potentially it's a really economical recipe, and there's lots of goodness in those leaves as well, including plant stanols that help to reduce cholesterol and blood pressure. And then I'm using 125 millilitres of single cream. Oh, what shall I do with the rest of the cream? I can think of lots of things. And in that goes. Carry on stirring. Not starring Sid James or Barbara Windsor, or Kenneth Williams, or even Charles Hawtrey. Oh, hello! Charles Hawtrey, incidentally, used to live in Deal in a cottage, although it's a great big whacking cottage. And he used to go to the Ship public house down the road, which is haunted, and spend many a happy hour in there. I have found my other tablespoon measure in a drawer somewhere, and I'm adding 1 tablespoon. There we go. This is very much like a batter, isn't it? In some ways, although with a normal batter you'd have a lot more flour, and I don't really think you want a Yorkshire pudding mixture topped with pastry. I'm not sure how palatable that would be. That's how it looks, and then we pour it all over those beautiful leaves, every last bit of it. Here's the pastry. It's chilled. I won't need all of it. I'll probably cut about just over half. That leaves that amount there. I could use the rest of the pastry for something else, maybe something sweet like a few jam tarts, or maybe a few mince pies, something like that. Put the pastry on the flour board. Roll your rolling pin in some flour as well, just to coat it. I need a rectangular piece. It needs to be reasonably thin. That should be about right. That's lovely. What I've done is I've put a strip of pastry round the edge of the dish. This is what my nan used to do if she was just doing a top crust pie, although like me she didn't make those very often and she was a Lancashire lass anyway. The easiest way of doing it is to put the pastry around the rolling pin like so, and then place it on, and that's very much a perfect fit. If you like, you can crimp the edges. I prefer to press them down with a fork, and you make a steam hole in the middle like that. This pie is going in the refrigerator now to have a nice long rest, and it'll go in the oven at tea time. The pie is ready to go in the oven now. I've set the temperature to 190, which is 375 Fahrenheit, gas 5. I'm going to crack this egg into a cup, give it a good old whisk, and I'm just going to give the pie a little bit of an egg wash to help it go nice and golden brown. Brush right to the edges. And in. Out from the edges. In. Perfect. Don't waste any of the leftover egg. It can be stored in the fridge for a day or two, and you can crack extra eggs into it with some milk to make a scrambled egg or even eggy bread. This little beauty is going in here, and it will take between 30 and 40 minutes. Remember, there's no exact time because oven temperatures vary. It'll probably be ready in 30-35 minutes or so, and in the meantime I'm going to make some mashed potatoes, and I'm going to steam up some carrots. The potatoes are ready for mashing. I'm going to drain out most of the water, but not all of it. A tip I learned from the hairy bikers was when you want really nice smooth mash, use hot milk or warm milk, not cold. This will help get rid of any lumps. I'm going to be using a cheeky swirl of single cream, and therefore I'm going to tip out most of the water. The carrots are done, they're lovely. The mash is lovely, look at that, beautiful. I've made extra carrots because, as you'll find out, I've also vlogged a pottage recipe. When the leftover carrots are cold, I'm going to add them to the pottage pot. I only had 3 carrots and they weren't particularly large ones, and I ate some of those, so I think we need some more. It's turned out really well. I don't think we'll be eating all this in one go. I'll cut this down the middle. This is the bigger piece. That can go on Dan's plate. With some filling. That's the egg. It all seems to have cooked well together. It's not a runny pie. It's one that would lend itself quite well to a bottom crust as well, but I've done it how the recipe asked for it. And now I'll have some pie. I've never tried a pie before that's got an eggy filling. This is something different. You can really smell the lovage. The lovage really comes through. And it's got a certain aroma, quite a strong aroma. It's a very old herb. I'm very curious to see what it tastes like now. We've got some leftover gravy from another meal, but I'll try it without first. Let's try this filling. It's very green. The vegetables are tender. The spinach comes through quite strongly, and the lovage. Even though I only added like 1 stalk of lovage, it's quite a strong taste, but it's not unpleasant. The filling's well seasoned. It doesn't taste too eggy. It's a rather unusual texture, but it's not unpleasant. This is, I can taste the lettuce as well, but it's not strong. The main thing I can taste is the beetroot leaves and the spinach and the lovage. It's a very unusual pie filling. It's not unpleasant. There's a slight bitterness to it, but I'll definitely make it again. Let me try the pastry. That's very buttery pastry. I'm going to see what it's like with gravy. Probably it might be a pie that lends itself better to liquor, which is a thin parsley sauce, but I didn't make liquor because we had leftover gravy. Next time though, I'd probably try it with liquor to see what that's like. Liquor is something you tend to get in London and the south east though, rather than the north of England. That's actually really nice, even with the egg. I think I'd probably give this pie about an 8 out of 10, but I want to see what Dan thinks of it, so let's move over to Dan.
Lovely, like buttery pastry. Really nice. I'm trying it without the gravy for now. Let's try the filling. It's really nice. The slight bitterness, slight sweetness with the egg, and the flavour of the lovage, which is a bit like curry. And 2 together. It's really nice.
What's it like with a mash?
Try it with the mash. Really nice.
Try it with some gravy now, babe.
Nice. Splash it all over. That's really nice. I like the texture. You don't really notice the egg in it, but it sort of all blends in nicely.
It's a good way as well of making a nice meal when ingredients like meat are in short supply. It's maybe a recipe people should learn, as there's been talk about food shortages, and this makes use of things that sometimes we have lying in the back of our fridge that we haven't got round to eating, like lettuce or rocket and other bits and pieces as well. What mark would you give it?
I'd give it about an 8.5 to 9, I'd say. I think it's really nice.
Would you eat it again?
I'd eat it again. I love the pastry. I just love the whole combination of it all. The egg, the lovage, the leaves. It's all really nice. Nice buttery pastry.
Oh, lovely. Oh, that's brilliant. So you'd eat it again?
Definitely.
Okay, thanks, babe. Well, I think that's quite a successful recipe again. I'll be back soon with another historical recipe, but for now, evening and bon appetit.